Welcome back to the Nowhere Emporium. We're on chapter 7, opening night. Next morning, as Daniel dressed, he stared off out of his wagon at the blazing sun, low in the morning sky. He did not trust his own eyes. As far as Daniel could tell, his wagon and the meadow outside it were somehow contained inside a room within the shop. How did it all work? How did Mr. Silver bring outside inside? Was it like a movie set? An illusion? If he were a bird flying in the sky above the wagon, would he only get so high and reach a wall? The familiar sound of beating wings and Mr. Silver's gleaming magpies glided through the open door. They fluttered around his head, touched down on his shoulders, stamped their feet, and pecked at him. They twitched their heads and flapped this way and that. "Get ready. No time to lose," they seemed to be telling him. Daniel finished getting dressed. The magpies chased him out the door, across the hall of stairways and through the curtain. Mr. Silver was waiting behind his desk in the shop front. "The only downside to travelling by flame," he said, expecting Daniel to know what he was talking about, "is the mess it tends to create." He ran his hand along a tabletop, coating his fingerprints with a thick layer of soot. "Your official Emporium duties, in the beginning at least, will consist of keeping the front of shop presentable. I expect this place to be shining when we open to the public this evening." Daniel gazed around the soot-covered room. "When do we open?" Silver raised a finger and shook off the soot. "Our doors open at twilight and close at dawn." And so, with excitement buzzing through him and a job to keep his mind busy, Daniel set to work, cleaning and tidying and clearing the place of soot. Everything was filthy. How long had it been since Mr. Silver last cleaned? Daniel adjusted columns of books and polished the silver and jet stone pieces of a beautiful chess set. Each time he turned away, the pieces would move around the board, as though a game between two invisible opponents was underway. So much work made the day rush past, and by early evening the day had melted into twilight. Daniel became aware that a curious crowd was beginning to gather outside. He peered through the window. "Why haven't they come before now?" he said. "We've been here for 2 days." Mr. Silver, who was at his desk writing in his battered old book, barely glanced up. Most of them haven't noticed us until now," he said. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You mean you haven't let them notice, don't you?" To which Mr. Silver only smiled. Then at last Silver snapped his book shut, locked it away in a drawer, stood up and threw on his coat. "Showtime," he said, patting his hair in a futile attempt to flatten the wild tangle. The door of the Emporium creaked open. Silence poured into the shop, deep and electric. Daniel held his breath, listening to the drumbeat of his own heart. Mr. Silver held out his right hand, then waved his left hand over it. Where only a moment ago there had been nothing but an empty space, a dove sat in his palm, white feathers glowing in the light of the fire. Daniel breathed 100 different scents: chocolate and wood fire, pipe smoke and cinnamon. Mr. Silver's grey eyes shone as he released the dove and watched it fly out into the darkness. "Welcome to opening night, Daniel Holmes." A flash of light illuminated the darkened sky. Then the customers began to come. Their eyes grew wide as they caught sight of the treasures within the Emporium. Grown men and women became like children once more, anxious to touch and inspect every shining trinket. When they noticed the curtain, Mr. Silver would pull back the material with a flourish, inviting them to witness the wonders beyond. Daniel watched with fascination as they filtered through, his mind fizzed with curiosity. "This is supposed to be a shop," he said. "So how come nobody's buying anything?" Mr. Silver wagged a finger. "That, Daniel, is where you are wrong. Come with me." The moment he stepped back through the curtain, Daniel knew something magical had happened. The entrance hall, full of staircases, once steeped in shadow and silence, had become alive with warmth and light. The soft flicker of the torches had intensified, reflecting and dancing on the sparkling walls. Aromas of caramel and spice filled the air. The hallways were dotted with performers and vendors, men and women scattered here and there at the foot of the summit in the stairways. Each was dressed in a combination of black and shimmering gold. Some handed out candy floss, or caramel apples, or warm chocolate pies. Others performed magic tricks, or juggled, or swallowed swords. No two items were identical. "Where did they come from?" said Daniel, passing a bare-chested man who was breathing fire. The flames formed the shape of a pouncing tiger, then an elephant, and finally a dragon. "From within," said Mr. Silver. As they walked, they passed several customers, chattering excitedly about rooms that contained impossible things, oceans and deserts, and windows to the stars. A little girl tugged on the sleeve of her mother's coat. "I saw a dragon, Mama," she was saying. "A real dragon, with fire breath and wings and a spiky black tail." I can understand what they're saying," said Daniel, who had until that moment forgotten that he was in a foreign country, and that these people were not speaking in English. "Of course you can," said Silver. "What use would I have for an assistant who could not communicate with my customers? You can now understand and speak any languages that you may need." Daniel tried to remain cautious, suspicious even, mostly because nothing he cared about tended to hang around for very long, but wonder had begun to chip away at his armour. "Are there other shops like this?" he asked. "Is there more magic out there?" "There is nowhere else like my emporium," Mr. Silver said. "There is magic, certainly, and plenty of it, but it exists at the edges of things, in the corner of the eye and at the back of the mind. Our world is filled with the extraordinary, Daniel. For many reasons, most people only see the things they wish to see. They are afraid of anything that cannot be explained by a scientific formula or written in a textbook, so they ignore the unknown. But for those of us who open our eyes, those who truly dare to wonder, there is treasure everywhere." They went around a sharp bend and through a tunnel of black stone to a door set in a corridor of black slate. A golden nameplate was attached to the centre of the door, and looping letters spelled out simply, "The Fountain." Mr. Silver reached into his coat, producing a crimson scarf and gloves, pulling them on with great care. He opened the door. The cold breath of winter brushed Daniel's face. He sucked in a deep lungful of air. It smelled like a December morning. Mr. Silver's feet crunched on the ground as he stepped through the door. Daniel followed. Moving from dim hallway to clean sunlight, he was standing on a frozen pond in the middle of a thick woodland. Everything around him glittered with a coating of frost, from the tips of the tallest trees to the forest floor. In the centre of the pond stood a simple fountain, made from 3 circular tiers of stone. A thin silvery liquid flowered over the stones. Mr. Silver smiled at the look on Daniel's face. "You question whether my customers are actually buying anything? I can assure you that they are. I sell them amazement. I am a merchant of wonder." He leaned over and gathered a pile of frost from the frozen pond, rubbing it between his gloved fingers. "But my customers do not pay for their experience in the Emporium with coins or notes. No, my price is a piece of their imagination." Daniel took one step back. "Oh, it's easily done if you know the way," Silver said. "Customers are free to wander through the doors, to be amazed and wonderstruck." He indicated the silver solution that flowed over the fountain. "The Emporium takes a little of their brimming wonder, their imagination, never enough for the customer to miss it, of course, and it becomes the liquid you see here. It is the fuel that powers everything you see, the lifeblood of the Emporium. Imagination is the root of magic." "Do they know?" said Daniel. In the pit of his stomach he felt sick at the thought of imagination being extracted from clueless customers. "Do you tell people what you're doing to them?" Silver shook his head. For a fleeting moment he looked old and fragile standing in the frost. "It wasn't always this way. There was a time, when I was a younger man, that my own imagination was enough. But I am growing older, and I must keep the Emporium running. And no harm comes to anyone. That is a promise. Imagination is alive. It grows in the mind like a tree. The Emporium merely clips a few of the branches. What little I take grows back in time," he observed Daniel. "If this has changed things, if you wish to leave, you may do so. I will drop you back in your own time. Just say the word." Daniel stared at the fountain, at the silvery imagination flowing over the stone. He was filled with doubts and questions, and he was wary of Mr. Silver's power. He considered what it might be like to return to his life, to the rain-soaked streets of Glasgow, to loneliness and to nobody. He looked into Mr. Silver's serious grey eyes. I don't want to go back, he said. I want to stay and see the world. I want to learn about magic. I want to know secrets. I want to be somebody. A smile played on Silver's lips, and he bowed his head to Daniel. As you wish. Something moved in the tops of the trees, a blinding flash of silver soaring into the blue sky. How did you do it all? Daniel asked. How do you make all of this? Tomorrow, said Mr. Silver. Tomorrow I will start your lessons, and we will begin to find out if you have what it takes to become the part of the Nowhere Emporium. Tomorrow the first test awaits. What sort of test? But no answer came. Daniel stood alone in the frozen world. The only sign that Mr. Silver had been in the woodland at all was a trail of footprints in the frost. Chapter 8. A New Project. Edinburgh, January 1883. The carriage pulled up outside a row of townhouses, wheels skidding on a snow-packed street. Steam rose from two slick black horses as the coachman leapt from his seat and opened the carriage door. A pair of passengers stepped down into the frozen ground. The first was Vindictus Sharp. His striking blue eyes and neat silver hair and goatee flashed in the light of the snow-white city as he glanced around the familiar skyline running up the slope of the old town to Edinburgh Castle. Close on Sharp's heels was a young man, perhaps 15 years of age. He was short and slight, dressed in a dusty grey pinstripe suit, messy waves of hair falling over a face halfway to becoming handsome. Vindictus Sharp paid the coachman without tipping him, and led his young companion up a slippery stone staircase. He rapped 3 times on the townhouse door with the silver handle of his cane. The door opened almost immediately. "How may I help you?" said the butler of the house. "We are here to meet Miss Birdie Sanford," said Sharp. "She is not expecting us, but I am sure she will not turn down the opportunity to catch up with an old friend." The butler looked at the pair for a moment. "Whom should I say is calling?" "Vindictus Sharp. She will recognise the name. We shared the stage together for a while." The butler nodded. "Very well. Please wait here." The door closed. A light flurry of snow began to fall. Man and boy stood in silence. A few minutes later the door was opened by a tiny old woman with a beehive of silver hair. Her eyes, magnified by thick lenses, looked Sharp up and down. "Vindictus Sharp? What has it been? 20 years? My God, you haven't aged a day." Sharp bowed his head. "And neither have you, Birdie." "I thought you were a better liar than that," she said, with a dismissive wave. "Come in out of the snow." They followed her into the house, which was spacious and grand, and smelled of flowery perfume. She led them to the large sitting room on the 2nd floor, where the butler was waiting. He poured a brandy for Birdie, a whisky for Sharp, a cup of hot tea for the young man, and then left the room, closing the doors. Birdie sipped from her glass, sucking air through her teeth as the liquor burned her throat. "I will spare you the usual pleasantries," she said. "I know you find them as tiresome as I do. We will come straight to the point. I assume you have resurfaced after these many years because you have a business proposition." Sharp leaned forward in his chair. He sipped from his glass. "I do indeed. Do you recall why I decided to take a break from performing in our magic shows?" Birdie sipped her brandy. "Of course," she said. "You wish to dabble in teaching, which I found strange considering your dislike for children. Is your daughter still locked away in that school?" Sharp waved the question away. "I'm not merely dabbling. 20 years ago, in Frankfurt, a hag visited my dressing room. She told me that one day I would find a pupil, and that together we would push magic to places it has never been." Birdie indicated the young man with her mahogany walking stick. "Is the boy good?" Sharp laughed. "Good? He has the potential to be great, almost as great as me. I believe we could sell out theatres across the world. That is why I have come. If I'm training the boy to change the world, then at last we can expect to make a little money along the way, don't you think?" Birdie's eyes turned to the young man, who looked at his feet. "Are you interested in taking to the stage, boy?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Sharp has been preparing me." "Would you care to show me?" The boy glanced at Sharp, who had instructed him that he should never, under any circumstances, admit to his talents in public. He had no wish to upset his teacher. A great many beatings had taught him his place, and knocked impeccable manners into him. "It's acceptable in these circumstances," Sharp said. "Birdie is aware of our abilities. She has considerable connections in the world of entertainment, and she has made a great deal of money, thanks to me." The young magician breathed deeply. "And thanks to me," said Birdie, with a prim smile. "Show me what you can do, boy." He concentrated on the tendrils of steam rising from the cup of tea in his hands. Immediately the steam began to flow faster, gathering together in smooth curls near the boy's feet, pushing upwards, forming at first the sketchy outline of a man. The steam refined rough edges, smoothing to become a work of art, until a replica of Birdie's butler stood in the centre of the room. The steam butler walked silently towards Birdie, bowing before her, planting a kiss on her hand. The figure spun in a circle, coat-tails flying, and vanished, leaving only a misty silhouette, fading slowly to nothing. Birdie stared at the air where the steam had been, with her mouth open. At last she turned to Vindicta Sharp, a wide smile breaking across her face. "What do you have in mind?"